While Moriarty and Gilbert come from computer backgrounds, Barwood comes to Lucas Games out of Hollywood, the movie business, is in charge of developing another Indiana Jones game, and sees these things as the silent movies of our time, with a small difference.
There's kind of a relaxed engagement that happens that's much more direct than a film where you attach emotionally to a character and you follow his fortunes, but you can't intervene in them. In a game, not only do you follow the fortunes of the character, but you actually are the character.
They are little worlds all to themselves, adventures in an electronic box. But never forget, it's people that give them birth. Something else to never forget, you never know when inspiration will strike. On the crossroads in San Rafael, Mike Hagedis, Channel 5, Eyewitness News.
Hello, and welcome to Drink the Video Games. I'm Brian, and today we are carrying on with our LucasArts point-and-click adventure games. Today's game released on floppy disk in 1992 for Mac and PC, then on PC CD-ROM a year later in 1993, and even on the Nintendo Wii in 2009. This game would go on to sell over 1 million copies and become the greatest-selling adventure game for LucasArts, but more important than the sales was the ability to go on one last adventure with Indy. Today we're talking about Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis.
All right, Jones, how you gonna find that statue and all this junk?
Indy, Kerner found you. What if he finds her? We should warn the woman.
You're right. I want to know more about that statue. You know, Marcus, the coldest year of my life was the one I spent in Iceland with Sophia.
On the verge of World War II, we find ourselves in the shoes of Indiana Jones, alongside our old co-worker Sophia Hapgood, trying to track down the legendary sunken city of Atlantis. In true Indy fashion, we'll find ourselves in tough spots, searching out clues, getting in and out of scrapes, and journeying around the world in a race against time and the Nazis for the prize of Atlantis. In 1989, we saw the release of both Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the film, and the Last Crusade graphical adventure game, and as far as we knew, that would be the last time we'd see the whip-wielding archaeologist, at least on screen, but there was a slight issue. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade made $474 million at the worldwide box office, becoming the 11th highest-grossing film of all time at the time of its release, and the graphical adventure game sold over 250,000 copies, becoming the best-selling game for the Lucasfilm Games Group.
When I was done with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, there was a reason that I invented the shot of Harrison riding a horse into the sunset, because I thought that brought the curtain down on the trilogy, and then we were all going to move on and mature into other aspects of filmmaking, and I never thought I would ever see Indiana Jones again. And Harrison was tenacious, and Harrison called George and got George thinking about it. Then George called me, and he said, well, Steve, what do you want to do? It could be fun to make another movie. And I was the holdout. I was the one that said, I'm done with this series. It was great. Let's walk away.
So Steven Spielberg might be able to walk away from Indiana Jones, but not Lucasfilm Games, so a sequel goes into production almost immediately after the release of The Last Crusade. Now, since this would be a first for Lucasfilm Games, creating a new story around an existing IP, former film writer and producer Hal Barwood would be placed in charge of the project, with Noah Falstein brought in to assist.
Then after that, we wanted to do a new Indiana Jones adventure because it was more successful. The Last Crusade was the most successful adventure game that we had done to date. So Hal Barwood, who had recently come from the film side of things, he was actually the co-ghostwriter on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and wrote and produced a movie called Dragon Slayer, which was a wonderful early fantasy movie. So he and I, looking very stern here from about 7 or 8 years ago when we collaborated on a Mata Hari game, we were looking at some other scripts that they had, but that was pretty terrible. So we went back to that beautiful library and used the things. In fact, I remember specifically there were some great books here we used for mythology to find out what is Indiana Jones going to look for this time. And it kind of boiled down to two possibilities. We came up with Atlantis pretty early on, but we didn't want to stick there. And we were also thinking about Excalibur, King Arthur's sword, but we realized that that would probably have to take place almost exclusively in Great Britain, and it wouldn't be all that interesting. So we stuck with Atlantis.
Originally, the pair was tasked with creating their new indie game based off a rejected script submitted by Chris Columbus for the third Indiana Jones film, but Barwood wasn't high on the idea. Now, Hal had written for Spielberg before. He wrote the script for Spielberg's first feature-length film, Sugarland Express, and had been brought in to help with the script for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Plus, he'd been involved with Lucas's THX 1138. So when Barwood suggests he and Falstein created their own story for Indiana Jones, they're going to get the go-ahead from the company. And with that, we're off and running on what would come to be known as, at least inside of Lucasfilm, Indy 4. So now that we have the plan for our next installment of the Indiana Jones franchise, let's take a quick break so Michaela from Drink to Movies can join me, and we can get a cocktail going to help us make our way to the famous sunken city of Atlantis. Michaela, welcome back to Drink the Video Games. How are you doing today?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Brian. So excited to be here talking about Indiana Jones. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Indiana Jones is the best. Absolutely. Yeah, you've been joining me here as we've made our way through the LucasArts point-and-click adventure games. And today we have a really good game in store for everyone. So, Michaela, as you know, we got introduced to Indiana Jones with the release of Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, which we actually talked about on Drink the Movies. And you probably remember being traumatized by the bugs, having snakes for dinner, heart-ripping action there in the Temple of Doom in 1984. And you remember that father-son bonding in The Last Crusade of 1989. But did you know that there was a fourth Indiana Jones installment?
And you do not mean the Crystal Skull installment that we shall not talk about because it got panned by audiences and critics alike.
That's true. We actually talked about that on a Patreon episode as well. Go revisit The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That's pretty good. That one came out in 2008. Yeah, I guess that one technically is the fourth Indiana Jones. But, after The Last Crusade came out, everyone thought that the Indiana Jones was done. Except for Lucasfilm Games, LucasArts, they decided to carry this on. So they called this game that we're talking about today Indiana Jones 4, and it became Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. So in the game, Michaela, in the Fate of Atlantis, you're trying to beat the Nazis to the fabled city in a search for the power of Atlantis. That's what you're searching for. They're these little beads. And that's where our cocktail is going to begin today with some orichalcum beads. So I'm going to go ahead and make those up, and then I want to throw it over to you so you can make up the cocktail for everyone. But to make our little orichalcum beads, in the game they do all sorts of crazy stuff, but you're going to make them up pretty easy. Just get some butterfly pea blossom tea. Go ahead and brew that up and then freeze it into some ice cube tray or some little ice cube balls or whatever you want to do with them. And those are going to be your orichalcum beads, and you're going to use those because they're going to help the cocktail change color as we make it.
Ooh, I love it. So you're going to take those, you're going to put a few of them in a glass. It should be a clear glass because you're going to want to see this color changing action. To that glass, you're going to add 1 ounce of vodka, any vodka of your choice, 1 ounce of blue curacao, and 4 ounces of any kind of lemonade that you would like, as long as it is the original color of lemonade and not pink lemonade. And that's really important because as you do this, you're going to have this really interesting kind of green translucency that is going to change with the butterfly pea blossom tea that's kind of going to melt into this and create a color changing extravaganza concoction that tastes delicious, looks very cool, and is very representative of all the things Atlantis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when that pea blossom tea, when those ice cubes start to melt, right, there's like a chemical reaction that happens with the acidity in your lemonade there, and that's going to kind of change it. It gets like kind of murky, a little like purplish, reddish hue to it. It's really, really pretty cool. So you don't have to do the orichalcum beads if you don't want to. You can just make this cocktail up and go at it. And I'm having it right now, and I have to say it's pretty delicious. Right, this is a pretty simple one. Right, last month in Grim Fandango, we made something that was a little bit more complicated, right, for the Day of the Dead. But this one, pretty straightforward, just like Indiana Jones himself, right? I feel like he could be, sipping this on a hot summer day when he's flying around the globe, point to point. They're just having this. It's a little bit lemony, obviously, from the lemonade, and it's a little bit orange, flavored from the blue curacao, which is excellent. But what do you think about this one, Michaela?
I really like this. I think it's a very simple drink. If you don't want to add the orichalcum ice cubes, you don't have to, but it does make for a really cool visual. It adds a little bit in terms of flavor, but not much. I really think that this is a very refreshing drink. It's definitely something, if you were going to look for the heart of Atlantis and try and understand its power, it would do the trick. It's beautiful, and I like kind of the layering. Vodka pairs really well with citrus. It's one of the reasons why vodka tonics with lime were so prevalent because the notes of the vodka can add nicely with the blue curacao. I usually think that things with blue curacao can be too sweet. I don't find that to be the case in this particular instance because of the lemonade that I used. So I would just make sure that you don't want it to be too sweet. So, if you're going to get something, if you're going to use lemonade, be careful in the syrupy content that you use for that, or else it could be a little too sweet for you. But
yeah, it could be a little bit too sweet. I used a Sicilian lemonade that I had here, and that is perfect. Gives it a little bit of effervescence too, which is nice. And if you want to go the mocktail route, right? So maybe you're watching Indiana Jones with the kiddos out there. Maybe you're trying to cut back. You can, omit the vodka altogether and just use like the finest call, like blue curacao drink mix. Right, there's no alcohol in that, and that's going to give you still your blue color. It's going to give you your orange and lemon flavor there of the cocktail, and you can still play around with those auric alchem beads. So I think that's going to wrap it up here, Michaela. We have a lot of adventuring to do here in the Fate of Atlantis, so that's what we're going to do. So thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much, and let's get back to Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. So after trying out a few plot devices, the pair settles on Atlantis being at the heart of Indy's quest for this next installment. But be careful with that script, Hal. This is going to be the first Lucasfilm game to get voice acting from the outset. But we're not going to worry about that until the game is done.
The disk space in terms of the art has become almost infinite as far as we know how to do. But disk space is still limited because of that sound. We're really increasing the amount of sound and audio that we have in the games because it's such a powerful medium of communication that we've never had before.
So with the game's story and settings done, it's time to begin work on putting this game together. The artists working on Indy 4 were going to be busy, creating hundreds of backgrounds for the game, of which over 200 would make the final cut. Rotoscoping, the art of tracing still images over motion picture footage, would be utilized by animators to bring Indy and Sophia to life. And lead artist William Eakin would be tasked with creating the design of Atlantis, which would be based off the Minoan civilization. But hey, at least the team had 256 colors to work with now. Now, by this time in 1990, Lucasfilm Games has become LucasArts, and the desire to see Indy 4 make a splash for the newly formed company is at a fever pitch. Not to mention, computers are getting more powerful and able to handle larger scale stories, so the game gets expanded into having 3 branching narrative paths, which requires countless lines of dialogue to be written and about 6 more months of added development time. But to scratch our itch for indie stories, Dark Horse Comics would print a 4-part Fate of Atlantis series beginning in March of 1991, with Hal Barwood giving the first issues afterward, urging readers to play the upcoming game.
The licensed products, mainly the Star Wars and Indiana Jones, they brought with them a whole musical and sonic, as well as, of course, visual and storytelling character tradition. And the mandate of the games group was not to just parrot what was in the movies, but to take it somewhere. And so certainly starting with the John Williams scores as a starting point, that gave us an incredible departure point. All of us had to kind of get our chops up on his composition style as best we could. It's it's quite challenging, and so we starting with that, we basically worked from the themes. We would start with his themes, and a lot of the time they were literally the things that provided the main structural points, and then to do some of the more interlude kind of stuff in the games that gets you from one thing to another. Or in the case of action music, he didn't write enough of a particular thing to have enough permutations to sustain an entire game, for example. So we basically just worked really hard to learn his style so that we could derive things from it, spin things out, and still keep it at least a clear shot close to what he did. Not anything, of course, of his sophistication, but enough that it worked. And that was a big success for us, to just make it work.
So with the design teams, programmers, and artists hard at work getting the game created, the music department can get to work on the score. Luckily, the team had previous films to go off of. Unluckily, they were scored by John Williams. How do you create an Indiana Jones soundscape in the style of one of the greatest living composers when your players might be listening to this on an internal PC speaker? Well, you call in your experts. Clint Bajakian and Michael Z. Land get busy on the music. Peter McConnell, who helped Land create the iMuse music system in 1990, is brought in as well, and the three get to work scoring and placing the music for Indy 4. Now, with all the pieces falling into place, and inside LucasArts, the title officially becomes Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. But outside the walls of LucasArts, the PC landscape was changing, and changing fast. From the time that Indy 4 went into development in 1989, and the game's release in 1992, there were 3 generations of Sound Blaster cards released, including the newest Sound Blaster 16 card, which would enable PC users to experience CD-quality digital audio. And that would go perfectly with the CD-ROM drives that were becoming more widely available. In fact, by early 1990, 125,000 of this new optical drive were being produced in the United States every month. So the game that the team set out to make in 1989, and their customers' expectations, had changed drastically in that time. Now, the team was happy with the story and the gameplay, the art looked great, the sound could become fuller, and now, Indy could have a voice.
As more and more powerful machines become cheaper and cheaper, we'll be able to deliver software that will run on CDs, that will have full musical soundtracks with it, that will drive higher and higher resolution monitors. So we'll get closer to the experience of watching a movie on television, watching a movie in the cinema.
But wait, there's more. Late last year, Lucasfilm Games began secret work with a Japanese company on a new game platform, the state-of-the-art. It's called the FM Towns. Instead of computer discs, it uses a compact disc. Instead of jerky motion, the screen scrolls smoothly with a palette of infinite color. Indiana Jones sounds a world better than on previous machines. You can't buy it in this country yet, but Lucasfilm says in less than a year, this type of system will become the standard for American living room machines. At Skywalker Ranch, Richard Hart, News Center 4.
So the game is completed. Hal Barwood has signed off on the project, but getting the voice recording was still to be done. That responsibility would fall to Tamlin Barra, talkie producer and director. Pulling the dialogue straight from the game's code, it would take about 4 weeks to get the audio recorded, according to the interview with Barra in the Adventure magazine. Doug Lee would be tasked with playing Indiana Jones, and would go on to reprise that role in 1999's Infernal Machine, and Jane Jacobs would be the voice of Sophia Hapgood. Now the only thing left to do is put this thing on a few floppy disks and send it out into the world. Releasing in June of 1992 for MS-DOS, Mac, and Amiga, the full talkie version would release the following year on PC CD-ROM in May of 1993. If you were an early adopter, you could upgrade to the CD version for $25 and the back page of the game manual.
But their next adventure features the one and only
Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, and that was a PC adventure game created by Hal Barwood, who was a film student with Mr. Lucas back at USC.
When I started, we were doing an Indiana Jones game, and it was one of those things which was new. It was the first game LucasArts did that had dialogue, really.
You fool! You come back to show me this prehistoric knick-knack?
Some of the challenges we faced with Indy was how to tell a graphic adventure story around something we'd only seen on film screen, really, at that point.
We must test!
So it was how to project Indiana Jones and his character across a tiny little monitor and make the audience, the player, who was manipulating him, moving him around the world, actually feel like they were being Indiana Jones.
Practically no one on the team at the time had ever built a commercial game and brought it to completion.
Then we have failed!
It was also the first game we did that you could do 256 colors instead of 16.
My God!
And it was all wonderful, but Indy was about 50 pixels tall.
We've done it!
Fate of Atlantis is this great, huge game. It's got the whole 3 paths thing going on, where the story could go down 3 separate paths for long stretches at a time. Unheard of in an adventure game at the time.
It really took adventure gaming into yet another dimension, because for the first time it really evolved the characters that were involved in the graphic adventure, and it evolved the type of story that was as very sophisticated as a graphic adventure.
The 1992 release of Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is a huge success.
With the game released and the reviews and awards coming in, Best Adventure Game of the Year from Game Informer, Computer Game Review, Games Magazine, and Game Players Magazine, and in 1994, PC Gamer listed as the 38th best PC game ever. Now, that might have been some recency bias, so let's go with 2011 Adventure Gamer's website, which lists it as the 11th best adventure game of all time.
Another computer game that will feature state-of-the-art animation is the new PC adventure game, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. And since virtually every software customer will have already seen an Indiana Jones movie, the computer game experience has to be equally realistic.
A consumer looks for believability, because if you're going to have fun, you've got to one degree or another suspend disbelief. So the story has to be an engaging one, and to some extent a real one, even if the theme is a fantasy.
For the Computer Chronicles, I'm Maria Gabriel.
Now, of course, with success and sales like this, sequels are in order. Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix spends about 15 months in development before eventually being canned, and Indiana Jones and the Spear of Destiny was in development by a third-party studio, but never seemed to have made much headway. Both of these stories would make their way to Dark Horse Comics in 1994 and 1995. Since The Fate of Atlantis' release, Indiana Jones has went on to have more stories told by LucasArts, though with far less acclaim than the original adventure games. The Infernal Machine in 1999, The Emperor's Tomb in 2003, and The Staff of Kings in 2009. And while in development, The Fate of Atlantis was lovingly referred to as Indy 4, the world would get an actual Indy 4 with The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in 2008. There's also been several LEGO installments and Indy's desktop adventures, and here at Drink the Video Games, I am definitely looking forward to the Indiana Jones and the Great Circle when it releases later this year. Because A, we're always ready for more Indiana Jones, and B, the developers have been name-dropping The Fate of Atlantis since it first was announced in 2021. Now, I don't remember the exact circumstances around my first time playing this game, but I remember having it in my childhood. If I had to guess, we probably borrowed it from friends, or maybe as part of an unofficial PC game compilation that we picked up at a computer show. Nonetheless, I remember loving this little adventure I got to go on with Indy, and I'm really looking forward to going back through the game again on YouTube with everyone. So let me know at home, if you played it, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, what your memories are with it, if you made one of the cocktails to go along with it, and what you think about the Indiana Jones franchise as a whole. We want to know all of that stuff. You can send us your comments on social media. We are at Drink the Video Games on Instagram, and you can leave comments in the YouTube channel, which is where the playthrough is going to be, so make sure you are liked and subscribed on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for joining me here on this next installment of Drink the Video Games, talking about Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time. Cheers.